Okay, welcome to another episode of the Vehicle Network podcast. And in this episode, I am delighted to have with us Paul Keitch, who is going to talk to us about disclosure in criminal investigations. Paul is a former colleague of mine at West Yorkshire Police, but I'll let him do his introductions when I hand over. But he is... not to put too much pressure on you, Paul, but he has got an extensive knowledge around disclosure and does teach disclosure, and it is paramount in your investigations, both just basic criminal investigations, but digital and vehicle investigations, that you have a bit of an insight if you don't fully understand disclosure already. And hopefully this conversation will either refresh your memory to some distant time in the past when you had some training on it, or it will alert you to new things that maybe you weren't aware of, and the consequences of what you're doing may make you seek out some further research and training in this particular area within your own organisation or externally as we see fit. So welcome, Paul. Welcome to the Vehicle Network podcast. If you could just give us a bit of a introduction as to your career and where you are now, in fact.
Yeah, so but thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to push this out, Noel, because it is important, and it's something that I think we need to push out a little bit further, and I'm glad that it's now going out to your colleagues. So, as Noel said, we were colleagues many years ago. I worked with Noel at Bradford, and I retired as a DS 6 years ago, actually, and got embroiled in the world of disclosure via an investigation run by the National Crime Agency. I did that for 3 years and became what was known as a lead disclosure officer. So I headed up a team of disclosure officers. I had 12 disclosure officers working for me. So my responsibility within that kind of arena was to set the platform for the disclosure and to work out how we were going to do the disclosure in line with the guidelines and legislation that was in place at the time. I left that particular organisation, the NCA, 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, and I've ended up working for Trading Standards now on a national inquiry relating to door-to-door salesmen and targeting vulnerable members of the public, and doing the sole disclosure for 4, well, in fact, more to be fair. I've got currently 4 outstanding. It started at about 8, but we've now got some through the court process. And I'm now just looking at 4 that are in the throes of going to court. On top of that, I do disclosure training on a fairly regular basis. I have my own small training company, which is available for you to view on LinkedIn under my name, or as PDK Assist, whichever you wish to look at. But I do the training on behalf of anybody that wants it doing, really. So I'm doing a lot of training at the moment for an organisation called Red Snapper that are delivering it to the Department of Work and Pensions. I've done some training with the City of London Police a few weeks ago. I've delivered some to the RSPCA because they've realised that actually what they're looking at is organised criminality, and they're moving across to work with the Crown Prosecution Service. And I've done some work with the Animal Welfare League as well. So I'm also doing that, and then on top of that, I'm delivering training to my own colleagues at Trading Standards. So I am up to date with everything. The benefits of what I do at the moment are the fact that I am a practicing disclosure officer, so I do disclosure, and I also teach it on a regular basis. I've done some teaching today. I've got a course that finishes tomorrow, and then I've got a course all next week, as well as doing some training on Monday for my colleagues up in Middlesbrough. So there isn't many things that I don't think I can answer a question about when it comes to disclosure. And the reason that I sit where I sit now is because, really, going back many years, we got disclosure given to us as legislation in 1996. So since 1996, we've been dealing with disclosure in criminal investigations. And to be honest, folks, not dealing with it particularly well. We sort of skirt around it a little bit. Noel, I know, worked in the what was it called? Was it called the fatal sort of
major collision inquiry team?
Yeah, major collision inquiry team.
Fatal
and
collision.
We were very lucky in West Yorkshire that we had accredited case builders that did the disclosure for us. So we were very lucky. But there are other organisations that, like Trading Standards, And like the organisations that maybe some of the listeners are going to work for that have to do the disclosure themselves. So it's important you have an understanding that if you are dealing with a criminal investigation, you are bound by the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act of 1996. That tells you how you are going to run an inquiry, what you are going to do. And all it asks you to do, the underpinning of that, is just to conduct reasonable lines of inquiry that point towards or away from a suspect. So that's all that it tells you to do. You can go on all your training courses you want, you can learn all the skills and abilities, but as a basic investigator, all you have to do is pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry that point towards or away from the suspect. And what we tend to lose track of is actually what we're going to end up with is a load of paperwork as part of our investigation. We're going to end up with a load of documents that we're then going to have to take account of at the end of it. Because again, what is a little bit unknown is that if I asked all of you out there what forms part of a prosecution file, there's only 2 pieces of paper, or there are only 2 items that sit within a prosecution file that go before the court. And those are your statements and your exhibits. Your statements prove your exhibits, and your exhibits are things like photographs, records of interview, collision reports, the things that you produce as vehicle telematics experts. All those kind of things are going to be your exhibits. And everything that's left by the wayside is your unused material, which you are going to have to decide that you are going to schedule and you're going to produce to your prosecutor, be it CPS or otherwise, because it may be that you use an external body, but you are going to have to produce to those people a list of your relevant unused material. So we're talking about all the material that produces your exhibits and your statements.
Yeah.
All those things that are left to the side that you think, well, I don't really know what to do with. And to be honest, folks, it's that unused material that's going to let you down in your investigations if you don't actually think about it. I've no doubt that it's been pushed out, but I don't think it's been pushed out particularly well. The fact that when you start an investigation, folks, don't just think about your investigation. Think about what am I going to do with all the bits of paper. So the request to know and his company for assistance, so there's that. There is all the notes you make of vehicle telematics. There's all the notes you make at the scene. I don't know whether you as individuals or organisations will keep pocket books or day books. I presume you do. All those are records of unused material that we're going to have to tell the prosecutor about.
Yeah.
And the things that are going to cause us the most problems really are those that undermine the prosecution case or assist the case to defend. So we have 2 tests within disclosure. We have the disclosure test, which is the material that undermines the prosecution case or assists the case for the defence. And that can be quite a lot, folks. Don't just think that if you've got a lot of undermining material, as we call it, your investigation is going to be kicked into the long grass. It's not. All it means is that your evidence is going to have to be spot on, and your undermining material is going to be considered by the court, and they're going to decide, or CPS or your prosecutor is going to decide, whether it undermines it to such an extent that you're not going to be able to prove your offence. The other test we use is the relevancy test. And when I talk about relevancy, I don't mean whether it's just relevant to the whole investigation. It has to be relevant in terms of the relevancy test to disclosure. So we are talking about material that has a bearing on the investigation, any person involved in the investigation, or the surrounding circumstances of that investigation, unless it is incapable of having an impact on your case. So those are the 2 tests, though, that you need to consider when you're looking at unused material. The relevancy test and the disclosure test. Is it relevant? And if it's relevant and unused, we actually need to be telling our prosecutor about it.
Yeah.
If it's not relevant, no. If it's not relevant, they're not interested. We are not here to produce all the bits of paper that are not relevant to our investigation. We are here to be able to say to them, look, this is our relevant unused material.
Yeah.
This is what we have used to produce our exhibits and our statements, and this is what's left, and this is what we are going to tell you about.
Yeah.
And in essence, we're going to have 3 piles of that. Go on, mate.
No, I think it's a really good point, and I'll let you finish before I come back to it. But about relevance.
Yeah, I was going to say we're going to have 3 piles at the end of this. We're going to have the material that's relevant and what we call non-sensitive. We're going to have some sensitive information, and this is where I think you, with your own individual programs and methodology for downloading data, and I know Noel's got some really good products out there. I'm not just selling him, but I do know that. So we're going to have a pile of sensitive material, and then we're going to have a pile of unused material that undermines our case. So in essence, we're going to have 3 piles of material. Well, in essence, we're going to have 4, because we're going to have a pile of prosecution material that is our statements and our exhibits that prove our case. So sorry, Noel, you were going to ask me a question?
No, I think, well, there's a couple of things really about what you've said in the opening section to this, Paul, are relevant, pardon the pun, but the issue, I think, for some investigators or for some people is deciding what's relevant and what's not for the investigation. And I know certainly from my experience of coming out of law enforcement as such over the last 6 years and working independently for the courts, working on some defence cases and hearing other people's experiences within the criminal justice system, how does the person in charge or the disclosure officer or the officer in the case decide what's relevant and maybe thinks, well, that's not relevant to me, but it could be relevant someday in their defense, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and there will be times when you will accumulate material and you think it's not relevant, and therefore the feeling then is, well, if it's not relevant, I don't need to keep hold of it. But exactly as you've said, there is a process there where at some point the defence are going to get involved and produce a defence case statement, and at that point, that piece of material may become relevant.
Yeah.
Now, it's a difficult concept, really, because what we're talking about is something that's relevant, but isn't part of the relevancy test. So as I've said, it's got to be relevant in terms of the relevancy test. So does it have a bearing on the offence under investigation?
Yeah.
Does it have a bearing on the person being investigated? Or does it have a bearing on the surrounding circumstances of the case? And if it fits into any of those criteria, then we need to be keeping it and we need to be telling the prosecutor about it.
Yeah.
That doesn't ultimately mean that the defence are going to get sight of what that piece of material is.
No.
Because they are only going to get sight of what the piece of material is undermines our case.
Yeah.
They're not notified about the material that's relevant that we're not using. And I guarantee that as you have, the more and more you work for the defence, you'll be more and more aware of what the prosecution should be producing.
Yeah.
You will see things that are quite clearly missing as part of your work for a defence team. You'll be thinking, well, actually, there should be something here. And the great concern is that if that piece isn't here, what else isn't here as well?
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
So, for me, folks, as I try to say to every training course, the 2 things I try to say to every training course is, 1, start your disclosure thought process right at the very beginning of your investigation if you are looking, because don't forget, this is only applicable to prosecutions.
Yeah.
It's not applicable to defence cases. We are talking about the prosecution side of a criminal investigation. Yeah. So start your process and your thoughts about disclosure right at the very beginning of the investigation. And keep every single piece of material because, as Noel said, when that defence case statement comes forward, which, everything that goes to Crown Court and the majority of cases I think that you deal with as vehicle telematics examiners will probably go to Crown Court because they're serious enough to get you involved in the first place. Yeah. They're obliged, they are obliged to serve a defence case statement. And it's that point where you think, blimey, that piece of material that I had months and months and months ago that I've subsequently lost or discarded has now become very, very relevant.
Yeah.
And so, and the only person really, Noel, that can make that decision about relevancy is the disclosure officer in line with the case officer. So whoever's writing the case file, as a disclosure officer, if those two people are separate, and sometimes it can be one and the same, but if those two people are separate, as I was when I was working on the disclosure, and as I am at the moment with trading standards, I'm continually saying, is X involved? Is Y involved? Because if they've not and they've dropped out, it may be that a lot of the material related to them becomes not relevant. Where does this piece of material sit within the whole investigation? Because that might suddenly become not relevant.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to get rid of it because it may be, like we said, when the defence case statement comes through, that suddenly becomes very relevant. But going back to what you said, the only person that can really make that decision about whether that piece of material is relevant is you as a disclosure officer in line with the case officer, because the case officer knows absolutely everything about the investigation. And it's that continual engagement and passing of information and making sure that we each know what the other one is talking about. And that's why, again, folks, if you do have a meeting with your barrister, please make sure that everybody that's involved in that is there at that meeting, because there will be things come out that the disclosure officer needs to know about, that the case officer needs to know about, so that you all need to be one concise, combined team.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot of information come out in that first part of this conversation. And I just want to recap on a few things if I can.
Yeah.
In addition to the relevancy. One, I just want to emphasize to the listeners that, Paul did work on a lot of murder investigations in a 30-year police career, dealing with complex crime investigations, as a lot of the investigations and a lot of our listeners will be involved in. So it does know, what he's talking about on the back of practical experiences. And I'm sure that that's come across already in the initial information that is provided us with. I think from my standpoint about looking at an investigation and to put a different spin on it, when you commence an investigation, you are going to generate a lot of information that could turn into evidence down the line. But it's that, I guess, which analogy is used in a lot of other things. It's the iceberg type of thing, in the sense that, as you point out, the statements and the exhibits are the tip of the iceberg that everybody sees in the courtroom, and then you've got all this information underneath that's perhaps the unused material that you do need to be mindful. You make a really good point of being aware of disclosure from the very outset. So when you are starting to make notes or take information from witnesses, then for me, and what's helped me to have successful investigations in the past, is thinking about that and thinking about those disclosure processes. And I'll link that into some of the work we do with vehicles as well shortly. The relevance and the reasonable line of inquiry as well is the conversation that we had in last week's podcast over deciding whether to examine something or not has been a reasonable line of inquiry in the digital world these days, because there's that many different devices out there, and people can have a bit of a tussle with what's reasonable as well. But the other point that I really want to draw out, which is what you mentioned in that as well, is in an investigation is evidence or information, reasonable lines of inquiry that would lead away from the suspect, because there are many investigations that tend to go down trying to prove things against a suspect, when actually, and we don't need to get into the realms of highlighting cases here, where actually I mean high profile cases where we've got the wrong person, and if we don't carry out those investigations, we might be able to eliminate them to get us to where we need to be, rather than a lot of these cold case reviews that come up. So I just wanted to emphasize on those points that you've drawn out in the initial part of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's the reasonable lines of inquiry that points towards or away. There has been a recent publication. It's called the Director's Guidance on Charging version 6, which is how CPS certainly want their requests or their reports for a charging decision structured to them. So the Director's Guidance on Charging specifically says that The reasonable lines of inquiry that you pursue need to be recorded. That's a given. You will record them somewhere in your policy. But those reasonable lines of inquiry that you identify and don't pursue for whatever reason also need to be recorded. And you may well get asked as part of your policy log about, well, so you identified this reasonable line of inquiry, but it was never carried out. Can you tell me why? And you need to be able to answer that. And CPS may well ask you that question prior to any charging decision being given to you. So, yeah, we do become a little bit blinkered about, that guy is responsible for that offence, and we don't look outside that. And sometimes I think that is because your suspects don't engage with us particularly well, do they? No. They don't really tell us an awful lot. No. So it doesn't give us an awful lot of opportunity to look at other lines of inquiry. But it will be quite apparent to you as inquisitive investigators that there are other things that you need to be doing. So if I say to you, well, I wasn't driving. So let's take, for sake of example, a fatal accident or something, and there's a member of the public killed that you're probably going to get involved in. And somebody said, I wasn't driving, I was sat in the passenger seat. Well, you're not really going to take that at face value, are you? You are going to do all those lines of inquiry that show that that particular person was. Now, if both airbags are deployed and you're adamant that your man sat in the driver's seat, I would hope that you are going to get both airbags examined for DNA, because it may be that actually he's telling you the truth and he actually was sat in the passenger seat and he was flung forward into the driver's seat because of the impact. Whether that is scientifically possible or not, I don't really know. Oh. But, it's a line of inquiry that points away from your driver being responsible in the actual driving sense. The passenger may well be responsible in any other sense. But it's a line of inquiry that you've pursued, isn't it? Now, if somebody said to you, did you get so you as the SIO says, get the airbags examined from the vehicle, and you say, well, actually, the near side one from the passenger side wasn't working. There wasn't even one there. It's a line of inquiry you've considered, but you can head it off at the pass because actually there wasn't one there to start with. Yeah. So these lines of inquiry that you don't pursue, you also need to record, because they can be really key to further questions down the line and further questions when you're giving evidence in court. So the reasonable lines of inquiry are massively important, folks, that you record those you do and record those that you don't do.
Yeah. And for me, that linking it into what vehicle system forensics examinations we do, and some of the listeners to this podcast. But for any investigation or any decision in an investigation, are you going to examine this vehicle and are you going to download it? Well, you might need some information to help you decide whether or not you're going to do that for the reasons you touch upon there, i.e. this car doesn't store any data, so we're not going to do it. But you'd still record the fact that you've considered you're going to do it and the reason you've not done it. The next phase may be, well, the car stores some data and it might be there. Are you going to do it? Are you not? And those are the more difficult ones, I guess, when it might be data that's there, but you don't know until you check it. Then you're going to have to really drill down and to put some really good rationale as to why you do or why you don't, do that. But all that needs recording as part of that investigation process and the material that you're generating in your investigation. And then those points need disclosing, because for me and the successful investigations that I've had along with the colleagues that I've worked with in the past, when you do all that, all the transparency is there and there's no issues down the line over questioning, well, you haven't done that, so what else haven't you done? You've kind of thought about it, taken care of it there and then, and headed it off from the outset with regards to managing the investigation and the strategic thinking through it.
Yeah. And it may be that you get asked to look at let's say an appeal of a conviction that from many years ago, and you've still got the system in the car, and your technology has moved on, and you've been able to gather more information out of that vehicle that wasn't available at the time. The software, the vehicle computer was there at the time. That actual hardware device was there. But your moving on of the technologies allowed you to get that data. And, one of the reasonable lines of inquiry, could have been that actually 5 years ago, there wasn't the software available to get what you actually wanted. And now there is.
Yeah.
That's why I've been able to get today and being able to argue a successful or unsuccessful appeal,
Yeah. And I've got a case example of that for a fatal collision whereby we did have we had an image of the hard drive from the infotainment system, but at the time we were doing the work, we didn't have the knowledge or the capability to decode some of that data. The investigation continued and the prosecution continued, and then I was aware of a breakthrough in being able to decode that information, and we had to raise our hands and then go back, even though the case was about to go to court, and say, listen, I've got this further information now that we couldn't decode at the time. I need to make you aware of it. And for me, that falls into those what I would call the 4 R's.
I was just gonna cut you off there and say, because it is a continuing duty to review what we're doing. There is a you will review as an investigator how your investigation's progressing, won't you? Just similarly, as a disclosure officer or somebody involved in the disclosure side of it, we have to continually review that material that we've got to make sure that it's accurate and up to date.
Yeah.
And you're right in the 4 R's, record it, retain it, review it, and then we reveal it to CPS or to your prosecutor, who will then make a decision as to where that's going to go. Is it going to be disclosed to the defence?
Yeah.
But when you talk about... Go on,
that continual review process perhaps links into those listeners who are experts, because experts also have a duty to, alert the court to any changes that they might have in light of further information coming to light. So if somebody does submit an expert's report that's Part 19 compliant here in the UK, which meets certain criteria for it to be entered as expert evidence, then if you are aware of some changes to that report since it's been authored, and some of these cases can go on for months, if not years, then again, those people will be well aware of having to review that and alert people to that point. So I guess those people who are working in the field of being an expert as well will be or should be familiar with the rules on constantly reviewing that and feeding that back into investigators. And for those investigators that are out there that are dealing and interacting with experts, just make sure that they're aware of that process as well, and don't make the assumption that they're not. They should be given a document from that's available from the CPS around the duties for recording and retaining information as well.
I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because are you going to retain absolutely everything for the next 30 years in the thought process that science might progress to a point where actually we can do something that we couldn't do 20 years ago? And that is probably unrealistic, to be fair. But there is access to material, from years ago that we can do some more up-to-date tests on that progress that inquiry and either show us that, yes, 100% that person was responsible for that offence or involved in that offence, or 100% they weren't involved in that offence. And, and I think anybody who... post-conviction found something that really alarmed them, as a responsible investigator and a responsible person, would bring that to the attention of whoever it needs to be brought to the attention of, to say, look, actually things have moved on, and actually what we actually did then may have been not as good as it could be today, and this may well have a bearing on the conviction of that person in the past. So things do move on. So there is that content. I mean, your obligation to review and retain to reveal material actually does end at the end of the court case. It actually ends then. That's when CPIA says that your duty to reveal information to the prosecutor ends at the end of the court case. But I think if you were made aware of something that quite clearly did cause you some concern, you'd probably be bringing it to the attention of whoever it needed to be brought to the attention of.
Yeah.
One thing I just do want to mention is that the people who are involved in, like Noel's organisation and others that may be listening to this, you may have your own unique methodology that you have developed that you want to keep and I say this with in inverted commas, secret from the defence. You don't want the defence to know about your methodology. So your methodology for obtaining the data that you've obtained that helps to prove this prosecution might be unique to you. It might be unique to your organisation, and you don't want anybody else to know about it. You have the opportunity to do that, folks, by making that piece of unused material, sensitive. A lot of legislation surrounding the CPIA incorporates the word police, but that was only because it was written for the police many years ago. And Part 15 of the Criminal Procedure Rules actually said that it's all investigators that are now bound by CPIA. So where it says police, it actually means all investigators. So you as investigators, if you have a unique piece of material that is unique to you and you don't want the defence to know about it, and it's unused, so it's your programming for getting the data out of a device, you can record that as sensitive material, and that will go to the prosecutor and not to the defence. The defence will never know about your methodology for getting that. And I think it's important to remember that, because that is your own little piece of knowledge and methodology, as I've said, for keeping that away from the defence. We don't want the defence to know how we've got that, do we? We're not going to send it out there unless, of course, you're going to go into the corporate world of selling it out to other organisations, and then it becomes a little bit out there. But there is that material that you can call sensitive that is down to investigative techniques that you want to keep sensitive. And if you've got something, folks, I suggest you try and run it that way. If it's unique to you and unique to your organisation, no, keep it sensitive. Don't say, well, it's unused and it's actually a programme that we've used for this, that and the other. Keep it to you. It's yours. You've designed it. It's unique to you, and you don't want it getting out there.
I think that links in with, tactics for law enforcement. There's sophisticated tactics that law enforcement use, and these rules are there, people, to protect those tactics, because if the tactics were disclosed, then it would make the job of the prosecution agencies, a lot harder. And there is a framework in place, to protect those tactics. You've got to weigh up as to where it lies in the grand scheme of things, as to whether or not it is, should we say, a protected tactic that nobody should be aware of, or is it something that's more, common these days that you're working with, and you may be required to explain that. But as Paul touches upon there, if you've used a particular method that you don't want disclosing, then put it on that sensitive schedule, because there are ways for these things to be protected, and there are hearings that can go on at court to decide whether or not it should or it shouldn't be disclosed. So just be having those conversations with the disclosure officers and thinking about, again, what tactics you might have used and what implications that might have via disclosure.
Yeah, the one thing you've got to remember, folks, is that the underpinning of all of this, and I should have probably mentioned this right at the very beginning, but your ultimate aim as a disclosure officer and investigator, no matter where you sit, and one of the other things I try to just get people to understand is, and it took me a long time to get this, is that actually we are just, and you are just, the accumulator of a lot of information and a lot of what we will change into evidence, and we're going to give it to another organisation to make a decision on whether that's suitable for a prosecution, aren't we? So our ultimate aim, is to allow this Article 6 of the ECHR and that absolute right to a fair trial. No matter what we do, folks, that defendant or that person on trial has got to have a fair trial. And if they don't have a fair trial, you're just going to lose it either there and then, or certainly at an appeal stage.
Yeah.
So let's not play games with it. If it's non-sensitive and the defence can know about it, if it's some notes made of you interviewing somebody, so it's your notes made at the time that you've interviewed a witness, then they're unused. They're not going to have an impact on your case as such. They're not going to be evidence. So let's tell the defence we made some notes at the time. They don't undermine our case, so they're not going to get a copy of it. So the only things we're going to get knowledge of, that notified are the defence, are the unused material that is non-sensitive. So all those bits and pieces that we've written down, the notes of witnesses, maybe the odd sketch plan of the scene that we're not using as evidence, all of those things are what we call non-sensitive, that are not going to give, and the description is, a real risk of serious prejudice to an important public interest. It's a bit of a convoluted mouthful, but basically it's the material that we use to assist us in our investigation strategy and isn't going to cause danger to the public. So all of that the defence can know about. All of the bits of material that undermine our case, we have to give a copy to, and it will be a redacted copy. They're not going to get, or they shouldn't get, names, addresses, emails, telephone numbers. They should just get the blank. So, if it is undermining, folks, don't keep it back. Give it to the defence, give it to the prosecutor and let them make that decision about whether it's going to be disclosed to the defence, because the ultimate aim is to disclose it to the defence in a redacted format. And then it means that as much as, I sometimes say this and I regret saying it, as much as we want our suspect to get nailed or get convicted at court, if we can walk away thinking, well, I did all I could and we just didn't prove it beyond all reasonable doubt, then we've done what we can do. It's not going to come back on us. We're not going to get a knock on the door in a few years' time for malfeasance in a public office or something like that. We were going to sleep soundly in our beds knowing that we've done all we can for the victim and, in essence, the offender, because that's what we've got to do. We've got to allow this fair trial.
Yeah. And that's the framework that we have to work in. And I appreciate we've people listening that will be from outside the UK, and you'll all have your own different frameworks as to how your judiciary system works. But I think as I've grown as an investigator and over the years, I've acknowledged the fact that, yes, there is sometimes this subconscious bias that, we have to prove it as investigators and as certainly as police officers. You're very close to victims. You're very close to that rawness of how somebody's been affected by a particular crime. But ultimately, as they say, the court is not, the court has no passion or is acting impartially towards the evidence as to whether or not people should be convicted of an offence, and those investigations have to be carried out and managed according to those guidelines that have been put down. And in this case, the CPIA have been there for coming up to 25, 30 years.
Yeah, and we are governed as well by the Attorney General's guidelines within this country. And those of you that haven't read the Attorney General's guidelines, don't be afraid of them. They're about 46 pages long and really easy to read, and they tell you how to investigate an offence. And if you do that and you read and you conduct your investigation in line with the AG's guidelines, there were some produced on the 25th of July this year, and they were only slightly amended. But they're not difficult and they're an easy document to read. And if somebody says to you in court, well, have you read and do you have knowledge of the Attorney General's guidelines? And you say no, they're going to say to you, well, how on earth have you managed to conduct a reasonable investigation then? And if you say, yes, I have, then they're going to maybe ask you the odd question about them. So that's when you need to know that you need to know about them. But don't go lying or feign. Well, you've got an option, haven't you? You've got an option to lie or feign, neither of which I would particularly advise you to do. But if they're going to ask you, have you read them? Say, yes, I have. I've read the up-to-date ones that were produced on the 25th of July, 2022, and I know what I know. So, our ultimate aim, folks, as I've said, is to allow that fair trial, to allow, as much as we want the person involved to be convicted of whatever offence they may well be suspected of doing, we want them to be convicted rightly and properly, don't we?
Yeah.
And that's all that CPIA is asking, in essence, is allow this man to have a fair trial.
Yeah.
And let the court decide whether the evidence shows that he or she has committed that offence. That's all we're doing. And we're just looking after all the bits and pieces of material that hasn't formed part of our prosecution file. That's all we're doing, folks.
Yeah.
So if we do that, we're not going to go far wrong.
Absolutely. And just to give the listeners a little bit of insight for anybody that might be coming on our training program, and the way that we do our vehicle system forensics examinations, they do seem a little bit, paper heavy or laborious in certain points. There's a lot of stuff that underpins the actual turning up and downloading the car. You know, initially we're starting with a strategy document, and we're documenting what we've been told by the investigator in the first place, what data types we're going to be looking at, whether we're going to pursue it, what tools we're going to use if we are going to pursue it, you know, pursuing it, an examination. And if it doesn't go ahead, it doesn't go ahead, but that will still go as unused material for the investigator to show what was considered at that particular point of the investigation. If we do go ahead, then it forms part of, you know, the prosecution papers. We do an examination, and with a load of notes that we generate from the examination, some of the stuff that we do at an exam will never see the light of day in court. It's a lot of unused material in some regards, but it's all documented on, you know, digital notes or the modern day pocket notebook, shall we say, around what we've done in those 1-2 hours that we're at the vehicle. And it does underpin it, and they have to go on to schedules sometimes, like Paul's alluded to, where we might want to redact certain areas. And as an investigation progresses, and certainly with vehicles and those types of digital investigations that go on and on and on, we then have policy logs and policy decisions throughout as to where we're going to go next and why we're going to go there next. But we're doing that with a 100% knowledge that could be made available to the court so that they can see what we've done and how we've done it. If you don't make any of those records, you're starting to bring questions into the court arena over what exactly have you done or what have you not done, and the reasonableness of your investigation and whether or not it's going to be fair to the defendant if you've not got a proper record of what you've done. And I'm just talking about an isolated activity here of examining a vehicle digitally. This is transferable into, you know, suspect strategies, witness strategies, other digital strategies, CCTV recovery. If you're not going to recover that CCTV from that camera there, but you're going to recover it from 3 doors down, why are you recovering that one and you know, not that one? So these are the reasons why it's not the most sexy of subjects, but it's the one that you need to get your head around in order to have a successful investigation.
Yeah, it is the one that causes your prosecutor the most angst. It is the unused material.
Yeah.
They're happy with your evidence, folks, because it's almost clear and transparent as your evidence. And that most of the things, you know, a lot of the things that you as vehicle examiners do, you might well do videoed, you know, just to have that backup to show that what you're doing. A lot of what police do is body cammed. There is CCTV everywhere, so there is a visual representation of it. What we're talking about is this little world of hidden stuff that is going to cause your prosecutor the most angst. You know, case in point, my barrister said to me a couple of weeks ago, this is all going to be decided, the particular case I'm working on disclosure. You know, and he's so concerned that at that point it was on about disclosure barrister. It now seems that he's quite happy to let me loose on it and deal with it, mate. You know, so that's the thing. There are barristers that deal specifically with disclosure because it is so concerning to the criminal justice system that we get disclosure right, because it reflects badly on everybody. It reflects badly on you as an individual, and it will reflect badly on your organisation if you don't get it right. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And you know, thankfully, I know we'll remember, we didn't get much training on disclosure ever in the police. It was a bit of an assumption that we knew what we were doing, and that's wrong. It's wrong, is that, folks? It is really wrong, is that. But I managed to escape relatively unscathed. I don't think I've got anything going to an appeal process via disclosure or anything like that. I managed to escape relatively unscathed after 30 years in the cops. But I wish I'd have known about it in the police more than I do. I wish I'd have had a better understanding of it in the police. And it's only through my own inquisitiveness, whilst I was working with the National Crime Agency, that I ended up becoming involved in this world of disclosure, which, you know, unfortunately, my wife hates me talking about it. She hears me talking about it day in, day out, teaching it, talking it, you know, and just, will you stop going on about it, you know? But it's important to me, and it's the thing that sort of now fills my life, shall we say?
Yeah. But it's important to have these people around in order to you know, to highlight these issues, because we all know how difficult and uncomfortable it can be when these issues are identified in a serious case that you're managing or you're dealing with, and you're having to live through it for the first time rather than having a bit of a heads up.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you a little bit about digital devices because, again, working both sides of the arena to a degree and working for the courts, you know, I see both sides of things now with regards to, let's just, I don't know, say a car or a mobile device is downloaded and not the full download not being presented to the defence, and the defence wanting perhaps access to the full download. I guess it goes back down to a little bit of relevance, but if we look at the amount of data that's on devices and what is, you know, what's relevant, if somebody's downloaded by, you know, my phone, and sometimes this is difficult, you know, I might, as an investigator, I might be only interested in my phone's activity over a set period of time. I can't, in some, well, certainly with cars, I can't dictate what period of time I want. I'm just going to get everything. And then I've got to make a decision on what is relevant and what I'm going to produce and what sits in the background. But it can present a bit of a tussle between prosecution and defence over disclosure of digital evidence. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically what data that you could possibly get out of a vehicle that you could search the way that the Attorney General tells us to search in relation to mobile devices like phones and tablets and laptops and things like that. Because what the guidance there is that if you download a phone, you are going to use what they call a keyword search. So you're going to get an image of that device, and then you're going to think about your investigation and think, well, these are the reasonable lines of inquiry that I want to try and identify, be it either way, towards or away from your suspect. And you have to think about the material that's going to be in that device that might undermine your case. So you devise a series of keywords when it comes to mobile phones and things like that. So you'll design a series of keywords, and you will do a keyword search, because the idea is, and the Attorney General's guidelines say, that they don't want to put an undue amount of work on you in layman's terms. They don't want to put an unnecessary demand on the time of the investigator and the prosecutor. So they tell you to use a keyword search. Now, the guidance, again with the Attorney General's guidelines, say that you as an investigator will write to the defence and say, these are the keywords that I'm going to use to search that mobile phone. Are there any that you want me to search on your behalf? And do you agree or disagree with the ones I've chosen? And it's their duty then to write back to you and say, well, yeah, they're fine, but can you also search on this? Because the one thing you're not going to do, and I don't know whether you do with the device, the control device that you take from a vehicle, whether you would ever give that to the defence for them to have a look at. I mean, sometimes you've almost got to liken it to a defence post-mortem, haven't you? The defence in a murder case will have a post-mortem of their own, but conducted by another Home Office pathologist. Now, whether you and Noel give that control centre from the car to another organisation to examine, or you ask them to say, what do you want us to try and find out of it on your behalf? Because I think if it's just, say it's a member of the public who's involved in a fatal road crash or something like that, there's going to be a lot of private information within that device, isn't there? Like telephone number, probably messages. You know, if you look at my car, I've got Apple CarPlay and it's got its own messaging system. So there'll be a lot of private data within there that potentially you don't want the defence to look at. So I think you maybe could do with saying to the defence, just as we do with digital devices and phones, this is what I'm searching for. What would you like me to search for? Because I don't want to give, I don't know what the wording would be, but I don't think you should give the download of that car's data to the defence, because there's a lot of information in there that you don't want them to have sight of. No, and similarly, if you're working for the defence, you need to be saying to the prosecution, look, can you, in this data download, find me the speeds that it was going at that particular time? I know you will probably be doing that as part of your investigation strategy anyway. But certainly mobile phones, you know, if you seized a mobile phone from your suspect who might have been driving at the time of an offence and you want to have a look at it, then you're going to search it just on keywords. And those keywords will reduce the amount of the amount of things you're going to have to look at. So you look at it on keywords, but you engage with the defence by writing to them and giving them an amount of time to write back to you.
Yeah.
And if they don't write back, it's their fault, mate.
No.
You know, and that will then be spoken about in court. So the prosecution and defence is a joint approach to a prosecution, unfortunately, which sounds a bit odd. But there is an intermingle and an approach that is joint between prosecution and defence, particularly when it comes to digital devices.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point about writing to the defence over a keyword search, and inviting them, because again, it's thinking proactively around it rather than being met with some criticism further down the line, I guess. And it just shows you a little bit more forward thinking about these, about these things.
Yeah, the whole thought process behind CPIA is so that, and again, there's a few things I say when I'm teaching, but on the Monday morning, when court starts, it can just discuss the issues of the evidence. All the processes are done. We're not arguing about things that should have been and should have been done and shouldn't have and haven't been done. Yeah. We're now talking about evidence because we've gone through a set process where we've engaged with the defence. We've had a defence case statement. We've done everything the defence want us to do, because as prosecutors, we do the defence's work a lot of the time by looking at the reasonable lines of inquiry that point away from their suspect, the digital device checks that they ask us to do, and then the defence case statement that comes and they says, well, actually, this is the name and address of an alibi, or we think there's an abusive process, those kind of things. We answer all those so that court on the Monday, as I always say, is ready to rock and roll.
Yeah.
And it is unfortunate. I say unfortunately, I don't mean unfortunately, but you do have to work hand in hand with the defence quite a lot to get to a point where we're ready to commence a court case.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's all followed in the Attorney General's guidelines. Again, the Attorney General's guidelines tell you how to look at digital devices with a keyword search. And that's what they say. And the Attorney General's guidelines are written by prosecutors and defence solicitors and barristers. So they're in a joint approach to trying to get that agreed end.
Yeah. I think to just put some practical context to what you've said there, and to give a couple of examples, there's cases whereby I've been instructed by the defence, police have downloaded a vehicle, and I have been specifically instructed to re-download that vehicle on behalf of the defence. And sometimes from a prosecution point of view, I might have said, well, the prosecution have already done it. Why do I need to repeat the work that's already been done? But I think certainly from one case that I worked with, I think it was more to protect the defence team, to show to their suspect that the process had been repeated by an independent person, and the data was the same, and that nothing had been skewed from it. I had another case, a chap on appeal, that again, it was from another country, who was very mistrusting of the police because of the country that he come from, and he wanted somebody independent to download that device to show that the data had not been manipulated in any way or changed. And sometimes, perhaps to give people that are just working in prosecution agencies a little bit of an insight, that's sometimes some of the reasons why maybe defense experts are not being awkward, but they're acting on the instructions ultimately of a client and looking for some independence and fairness to alleviate that. And whenever I've gone and done that, it's always been in the confines of a police station and being observed by the person from the police who's downloaded, and we just have a general conversation. We repeat the process, and generally, from my point of view, I'm like, I can just work with the data. I don't really need to repeat the process. But nevertheless, I guess the option is there for people to do that. But as a prosecution agency and a disclosure officer, I think you perhaps need to be mindful of that, because ultimately they could end up with all that personal information as a result of acquiring the data again.
Yeah, and it's what and from a prosecution point of view, certainly in relation to a digital device, a mobile phone, we would never allow that to happen. We would never, it would be very unique circumstances for that to happen. It may be that it does, with conversations, but there is such, listen, for those of you that are working in the prosecution side, if you have ever looked at a mobile phone, there will be things in there that once seen, never forgotten, won't they? some horrors in mobile phones, and why should we be showing that about to everybody? So it's a bit of a balancing act. But again, folks, do what your prosecutor says. If your prosecutor says do it, then do it. But again, the one thing I always say is make sure it's written down. Don't do it on the back of a telephone call. Make sure there's an audit trail of absolutely everything you do, especially when it comes to engaging with the defence, because I think it's Michael Mansfield said in it, that if it ain't written down, it didn't happen. And that's a bit of an age-old saying within all organisations, isn't it? That if it ain't written down, it didn't happen. So everything that the prosecution want you to do, make sure there's an audit trail of it. So be careful with digital devices. They're out there. That everything is digital, isn't it now? Absolutely everything is digital. Just be careful with them, because they're easy to deal with, but at first glance, it can be a bit of a minefield of trouble.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap up with our questions that we always ask our guests before they depart. And the first one is, what do you wish you knew before you started in your industry? Your hindsight could be the listener's foresight.
I wish actually I'd have had an understanding of disclosure before I started working within an investigation agency that relied on me to record and retain material, because there is undoubtedly times when I've probably slid something in the bin and not done it out of any malice, just done it out of not knowing and not thinking. So I think now I'm a little bit ingrained in it. I think I should have a better understanding of what CPIA was all about. Bearing in mind, I worked on merger investigations as well. So
great. When have you failed, and how did you overcome it?
On the National Crime Agency, where the first set schedules I put in, they were sent back, and what they were actually clarifying was the fact that I'd actually put a load of copies of material on those schedules, if you can liken it into the disclosure world. And copies are incapable of having an impact on your case and therefore don't need to be revealed. So that was a learning curve for me. When have I failed? I failed in my first marriage, so I got married again. Is that a failure and I've overcome something? So that's a failure and I've overcome something now.
Tell me, although I reckon I know the answer to this. If I don't, I've got another one. Tell me one recommended resource you could point listeners to.
So, folks, the Attorney General's guidelines and PDK Assist, which you will find on LinkedIn. Honestly, folks, just on that, everybody thinks there's a cost involved to everything. There isn't. If you want some training, I'll deliver you some training, and there will be a cost involved to it. If you want a bit of advice, my details are on LinkedIn. Just give me a quick message on LinkedIn and I'll do what I can for you. It's not all about money. The majority is. But if you want a bit of advice, then just contact me via LinkedIn, and I will willingly give you that assistance.
Yeah, we appreciate that. We'll obviously put some contact details within this lesson of the podcast, and perhaps if we can get the Attorney General's guidelines into a PDF, possibly. I can include that in here as well as a resource. Yeah. Are there any myths about disclosure then that you wish to debug?
Yeah, the big myth is that it's really difficult, and it isn't. It's really easy. All it just means to be thinking. It means to think about it. And there's this thing about disclosure. Everybody you talk to thinks, I don't want to go anywhere near disclosure. Actually, it's quite easy if everybody around you plays their part, and you can't control that at times. But if everybody plays their part, then it's really, really easy. The times when it's difficult are when they don't. But it's not difficult, folks, as long as you think about it from the very beginning and don't think about it as an admin task at the end.
Yeah. And I think that's true with a lot of things in life, isn't it? We have to fear something before we actually embark on it, and it's actually not as bad as it first was thought. If you're in my shoes, what question would you have asked that I haven't?
Where would I like to be in 5 years?
Where would you like to be in 5 years, Paul?
I would like to be retired. I've set myself a age limit of 60, but in 5 years' time, I'll be 61. I would like to be retired. Whether I will be or not, because the training seems to be ever evolving, I don't know. But in 5 years, I'd like to be retired and going travelling somewhere.
Absolutely.
For a year. I'd like to go travelling for a year.
Brilliant. Can you recommend us a favourite driving track? We're going to put a playlist together for people that might be up and down the country driving from this podcast. What would you recommend people listen to? We'll put it in.
I actually like quite a lot of the Kings of Leon tracks. And I think the one that everybody likes is Sex on Fire, isn't it? But it does, when I put it on, encourage me to drive a little bit fast. A little bit fast. So a Kings of Leon track for me, folks.
Right, brilliant. We'll put your details for LinkedIn and PDK Assist within the lesson. Thank you very much for joining us. We've just tipped over the hour mark. Initially, Paul said we were going to be on for 5 minutes, but I knew it would go on a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the listeners have found it useful, and I'm sure we'll catch up again at some point because things are constantly changing and evolving. So, thank you very much.
Lovely. No worries. Take care, folks. Thank you. See ya.